Tonight, we step straight into the heart of the Roman Empire, into a city that never truly rests. The air is thick with smoke from cooking fires and the constant smell of humanity pressed too close together. Streets are narrow, paved with uneven stones, slick with spilled wine, rotten food, and worse. Vendors shout in Latin and Greek, competing for your attention, with baskets of olives, figs, and questionable cuts of meat that have been sitting in the sun far too long. Donkeys bray, carts creak, and somewhere nearby a water seller calls out his price for a ladle of warm, slightly cloudy liquid. You probably won't survive this, but that's exactly why we're here tonight. To wander the streets of Rome, not as a noble senator, not as a marble statue gazing forever into the horizon, but as you. Just an ordinary person dropped into a world that doesn't particularly care whether you last more than a day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from. Post your location and your local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, let the room settle, and let's drift into tonight's journey together. You step cautiously onto a Roman street, the uneven stones slippery under your sandals. Instantly, you're nearly run over by a cart piled high with amphorae of wine, the driver shouting something that sounds like an insult. You press yourself against a wall and realize the walls themselves loom strangely. Multi-story apartment blocks called insulae, crammed together so tight the sky feels like a thin strip above you. Laundry flaps overhead, dripping suspicious liquid onto your hair. Congratulations! You've just taken your first Roman shower. The noise is relentless. Hammering from blacksmiths, chatter from markets, and the occasional thud of a body somewhere you can't quite see. A beggar with a missing eye tugs at your tunic, muttering blessings if you give a coin or curses if you don't. And here's the reality check. Rome is enormous, maybe 1 million people at its peak, a population density worse than modern Manhattan. Historians still argue whether Rome ever truly crossed that 1 million mark. But either way, you're in the ancient equivalent of a human sardine can. The smell is something you won't forget. Open sewers run down the middle of many streets. Citizens casually toss chamber pots out windows. You hear a splash nearby and, yes, that was exactly what you think it was. And if you're wondering about sanitation, the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer system, exists, but it's more impressive on a map than under your feet. The system can't keep up with the waste of so many humans, animals, and industries. You've walked maybe 5 minutes, and already you're thinking a medieval village would be a spa resort compared to this. You're hungry, so you follow the smell of bread. Baker shops spill warmth into the streets, and you remember that Roman emperors often distributed grain to the people. Free food sounds great, until you realize the bread you're biting into is dense, chewy, and sometimes laced with grit from poorly ground flour. Your dentist, if Rome had dentists, would not approve. Side fact: some archaeologists actually find worn-down teeth in Roman skeletons, not from candy, but from stone dust ground into bread. But food isn't the only attraction here. You catch sight of a taberna, a roadside snack shop. The counter has little holes where hot stew or wine once sat. People lean on the marble top, sipping thin wine that tastes more like vinegar, spiced to cover the bite. And speaking of wine, you quickly learn it's always diluted. Romans think drinking at street is barbaric. You might laugh at that until you taste their fish sauce, garum. It's everywhere, on bread, in soup, splashed on almost everything. Imagine ketchup but fermented fish guts. You wrinkle your nose, but hey, locals swear by it. Just when you think you're safe enjoying your cup, a commotion erupts. A group of slaves march by, carrying heavy amphorae, overseen by a man with a whip tucked casually under his arm. He glares at you like you're in the way. And in truth, you are. Rome runs on slavery, and free citizens, especially newcomers, are expected to step aside. You shuffle quickly, feeling the sting of humiliation. And then the noise shifts. A crowd rushes toward the forum. You follow, curious, and suddenly you're in the middle of Rome's beating political heart. White marble columns gleam, but the crowd isn't admiring architecture. They're shouting, jeering, throwing rotten vegetables at a magistrate making a speech. You learn quickly Roman politics is theater, messy and loud. And, unlike your modern world, there's no polite "order please." If the mob doesn't like you, you'll know it. Still, it's mesmerizing. Senators in their spotless togas, slaves scurrying with wax tablets, shopkeepers arguing prices. All of life colliding in one square. You overhear debates about grain prices, wars on the frontier, and rumors of yet another emperor behaving badly. Historians still argue whether ordinary citizens had real influence here, or if the whole voice of the people thing was just smoke and mirrors. But you can tell the crowd matters. A bad speech today could mean riots tomorrow. By the time dusk settles, the city doesn't slow. Oil lamps flicker, taverns fill, and the sound of dice drifting through doorways. Gambling is illegal, but that doesn't stop anyone. Somewhere, a poet recites verses for a few coins. Somewhere else, thieves lurk in the alleys, waiting for someone, maybe you, to stumble past. Roman streets at night are dangerous. No police, no streetlights, just shadows. If you want to last until morning, you'll need to walk quickly, keep your hand on your purse, and pray Fortuna smiles on you. And here's a quirky little tidbit. Romans sometimes left graffiti on walls, and not the noble inscriptions you imagine. Think rude doodles, sarcastic comments, and "X was here" messages. Pompeii's walls preserve jokes about bad tavern food and even personal insults. So as you glance at a wall by torchlight and spot a scratched note declaring "Secundus loves Iris," you smile. Humanity hasn't changed that much. But you're exhausted. Your feet ache from uneven stones, your nose still burns from the sewers, and the weight of the crowd has worn you down. Tomorrow, you'll have to find a place to sleep. Spoiler, it won't be comfortable. You finally stumble back through the crowded lanes, searching for a place to rest. Forget visions of marble villas with courtyards and fountains. Those belong to the wealthy elite. For you, it's the insulae, Rome's towering apartment blocks. From the outside, they look imposing, 5 or 6 stories of crumbling brick and timber looming over narrow streets. Up close, they're less majestic and more terrifying. The wooden staircases creak under your weight as you climb. No elevators, no handrails, no guarantees the steps won't collapse at any moment. Fires are common, and if one starts in the middle of the night, you'll either scramble down in panic or, well, let's not finish that thought. Ancient writers like Juvenal even complained that the rich lived on the lower floors while the poor got shoved up near the rooftops. If you've ever lived in a 5th floor walk-up, congratulations! You've basically lived Roman life, minus the smell of fish sauce wafting through the walls. Inside your one-room unit, the apartment is little more than 4 walls, a straw mat, and perhaps a clay lamp if you're lucky. The walls are thin, so thin you can hear your neighbor's baby wailing, another neighbor's argument, and someone down the hall practicing on a badly tuned flute. Privacy is a luxury you won't find here. You look around for a kitchen, but realize there isn't one. Cooking fires in insulae are dangerous, so most tenants either eat cold meals or buy food from street vendors. This explains why the snack bars or thermopolia are always packed. For you, tonight, it's a loaf of bread, maybe a wedge of cheese, washed down with watered wine that tastes faintly of the clay jar it was stored in. Sleep on a full stomach? Rare luxury. As you settle in, you hear a shuffle at the door. Rats. They scamper boldly across the floor, nibbling at crumbs, bold as anything. Don't even think about calling pest control. Cats help, sure, but they're pets of the wealthy. You get to chase vermin with a sandal. That's the Roman way. And here comes the kicker. Your landlord doesn't really care if the building falls apart. Insulae were notorious for collapsing. In fact, Emperor Augustus had to pass regulations limiting their height because developers kept cramming more floors on top of weak foundations. Historians still argue whether these laws were enforced or just a PR stunt. But either way, being crushed under rubble is a daily worry. You try to ignore the creaks above you and focus on the hum of the city outside. People shout in the streets, traders close their stalls, and someone nearby sings an off-key drinking song. If you're lucky, you drift off for a few hours. If you're unlucky, you're jolted awake by a midnight brawl in the alley, or worse, the sound of soldiers on patrol looking for troublemakers. The truth is, sleep in ancient Rome isn't restful. Oil lamps barely light your space, and smoke from them clogs the air. Mosquitoes hum around your ears, and without plumbing, you share a public latrine with everyone else on your block. Picture a long bench with holes, no stalls, and constant chatter while people do their business. Romans were social even in the bathroom. A quirky little tidbit: archaeologists have found sponge sticks, tersoria, used for cleaning, shared among users, and rinsed in a bucket of vinegar water. Not exactly the spa treatment you dreamed of. Morning comes and sunlight filters through the cracks in the shutters. Your back aches from the straw mat, and your stomach rumbles. A peddler calls from the street below, selling bread for breakfast. Children shriek as they chase each other down the alley. From the floor above, dust sprinkles down onto your hair as your neighbor stomps about. Welcome to daily life in an insula. The irony is, for all the discomfort, this is considered normal. Most Romans live like this, except for the very poor who sleep on the streets and the very rich who retreat to mansions on the hills. If you thought survival here meant gladiator fights or wild animals, think again. It's surviving the walls that might collapse, the fire that could break out, the rats nibbling at your food, and the sheer noise that never stops. And when you step outside again, blinking in the morning sun, you realize this was just your first night. You still have to make it through breakfast. Roman style. The morning sun spills across the rooftops, and your stomach growls louder than the street hawkers below. Breakfast in Rome isn't the feast you might hope for. Forget bacon, eggs, and coffee. The average Roman starts the day with a hunk of yesterday's bread, maybe dipped in watered-down wine. If you're lucky, there's some cheese or olives. If you're not, it's just dry crusts, chewed slowly as you watch the street vendors set up shop. You wander outside, looking for something more exciting. The market is already alive with shouts and smells. There's fresh produce, figs, grapes, pomegranates, but fresh is relative. Some fruit looks bruised, others shriveled, and you realize storage without refrigeration is, well, limited. Fishmongers display their catch, but the odor tells you it's been here since yesterday. A passing shopper pinches their nose. Still, the Romans adore seafood. To preserve it, they douse everything in salt, dry it in the sun, or drown it in, you guessed it, fish sauce. Ah, garum, the legendary Roman condiment. Amphorae of the stuff line the stalls, their pungent smell invading every corner of the market. Made by fermenting fish guts with salt under the hot sun, garum is the ketchup of its day. Romans put it on nearly everything: bread, beans, even fruit. You bravely dip a piece of bread into it. The taste? Salty, tangy, and a little alarming. You gag, but locals nod approvingly, as though you've finally become civilized. Side fact, garum was so profitable that entire coastal towns survived on its production. It's basically the ancient version of a billion-dollar condiment empire. Of course, not everyone gets garum. The poorest citizens survive on pulse, a kind of porridge made from barley or emmer wheat. You try a bowl, it's bland, lumpy, and filling, but not inspiring. Imagine oatmeal, but without sugar, milk, or fruit. Just mush. Soldiers live on this stuff, day in, day out. Historians still argue whether pulse was considered a respectable staple or the food of desperation. Either way, you feel grateful for the occasional fig. By midday, wealthier Romans are enjoying their prandium, a light lunch of bread, cheese, vegetables, and maybe some leftover meat. You can't help peeking at what's on their plates: salted pork, sausages, or roast dormice stuffed with nuts and honey. Yes, dormice. The delicacy is so prized that wealthy Romans keep them in special terracotta jars called gliriera, feeding them until they're plump. You, on the other hand, are chewing on beans with olive oil, pretending it's gourmet. Later in the day, the real feast happens: cena, the main meal, often stretching into the night for those who can afford it. That's when the tables groan with roasted boar, honey-glazed hams, exotic fruits from the empire, and rivers of wine. But you're seated at a dingy tavern, nibbling chickpeas while listening to a drunk argue about chariot races. Welcome to the culinary class divide. And let's talk about bread again. Romans consume it constantly, but the quality varies wildly. Grain arrives in bulk shipments from Egypt and North Africa. Then it's milled into flour. But the grinding stones leave traces of grit behind. Bite into a loaf and you risk chipping a tooth. Archaeologists examining Roman skeletons often find tooth wear so severe it looks like they chewed rocks. You suddenly chew much more carefully. Still, Roman cuisine isn't all hardship. You find a honey cake at a street stall, its sweetness cutting through the salt and sour flavors. Honey is the only real sweetener here. No sugar, no chocolate. For a moment, you close your eyes and savor it, ignoring the flies buzzing around your head. And here's a quirky tidbit. Wealthy Romans sometimes reclined on couches while eating, propped up on their left elbow, reaching with their right hand. Imagine hosting a dinner party lying sideways on cushions, trying not to spill stew down your toga. Meanwhile, slaves scurried around with trays, pouring wine mixed with herbs, flowers, or even seawater. You glance at your cup and wonder if you'd rather stick with plain, vinegar-flavored wine instead. As the day wears on, you realize food isn't just about survival, it's politics. The state hands out grain to keep the people calm, the emperors boast of banquets to show their power, and the marketplace is a constant theater of status. If you want to last in Rome, you'll need more than bread in your belly. You'll need to play the game of appearances. Eat when you can, and never trust the freshness of fish. By evening, your stomach feels heavy with barley and beans, and the smell of garum still clings to your hands. You swear you'll never eat it again, until tomorrow, when you'll find it waiting in every pot. Your belly is full of beans, bread, and maybe a little too much garum. But the day isn't done. You follow the crowd toward the unmistakable heart of Roman leisure, the public baths. From a distance, the bath complex looks like a palace, towering walls of brick and marble, steam curling into the air like an invitation. Romans don't just bathe here, they live here, gossip here, and sometimes, if rumor is true, scheme here. You pay a small entrance fee, cheaper for men, often free for children, though women sometimes have separate hours or their own spaces. The first thing you notice when stepping inside is the noise. Echoes bouncing off vaulted ceilings, laughter, the splash of water, and arguments over dice games in the corner. It's less spa retreat and more shopping mall with hot tubs. You start in the apoditarium, the changing room, where slaves guard, or sometimes steal, clothing. You quickly learn to keep your belongings close, though realistically you don't own much worth taking. You strip down and step nervously into the next chamber, clutching your towel. The tepidarium greets you with warm, humid air. The floor radiates heat thanks to the hypocaust, Rome's ingenious underfloor heating system. Slaves stoke furnaces below, sending hot air through raised floors and hollow walls. It's a marvel of engineering, but you can't help but think about the poor souls sweating in the basement to keep the comfort flowing. Historians still argue whether smaller bathhouses always had hypocausts or if they relied on simpler fires. But either way, the result is steamy bliss for you. Next comes the caldarium, the hot bath. The heat slams into you and sweat drips down instantly. The water is cloudy, full of bodies, and let's be honest, hygiene here is questionable. You slide in anyway because everyone else does. Men chat about politics, trade, and gladiator games. Others boast about their horses, their lovers, their latest gamble. A philosopher in the corner mutters about the moral decay of the empire, while a drunk splashes him. Welcome to Rome's social network. And yet the baths aren't just about water. Slaves offer massages with oils, scraping your skin afterward with a curved tool called a strigil. Sounds relaxing until you realize everyone shares the same strigils dipped in a communal bucket. You glance at the water and notice a suspicious floating hair. Or 3. Suddenly, that exfoliation feels more like an infection waiting to happen. You try not to scratch when someone mentions lice. Bathers gossip about outbreaks of skin disease, and you think back to that rat scuttling across your intola floor last night. Rome, you realize, is a paradise for parasites. And here's a quirky tidbit. Archaeologists studying latrine soil from Roman sites often find evidence of whipworm and roundworm eggs, meaning intestinal parasites were rampant. You're sharing the water with more than neighbors. The frigidarium offers cold relief. You plunge in, gasping, as icy water jolts your system. For a moment, it feels glorious, until you realize your teeth are chattering and you've just gone from fever hot to bone cold in seconds. Your immune system won't thank you tomorrow. Still, Romans swear by the contrast, claiming it keeps them healthy. As you sit shivering, you overhear a heated debate. A senator is whispering to a merchant about grain shortages. Another man brags about bribing a magistrate, and someone else spreads a rumor about the emperor's latest scandal. The baths are Rome's gossip hub, a place where information flows faster than the water itself. If you want to survive in this city, listening here is as valuable as eating. You dry off with your thin towel, oil still clinging to your skin. Outside, hawkers sell snacks, nuts, honey cakes, and watered wine, perfect for those too tired to cook after their soak. Children splash in smaller pools, old men argue about Virgil's poetry, and young men flex muscles hoping someone notices. You suddenly understand. The baths aren't about being clean, they're about belonging. But belonging has a cost. You cough slightly, wondering if that man sneezing in the caldarium has just passed you something more than a friendly nod. Historians still argue whether the baths spread more disease than they cured relaxation, but you already suspect the answer. As you step back into the evening air, your body feels both relaxed and uneasy. You survived the baths, but parasites, infections, and rumors cling tighter than the oil on your skin. Tomorrow, you'll need to think about work. And in Rome, work isn't a matter of passion, it's a matter of survival. Morning light slants across the crowded street, and today, you're not just wandering, you're expected to work. In Rome, your survival depends not on finding your passion, but on scraping together enough coin to pay rent, buy food, and avoid starving. And here's the twist, the kind of work you do isn't really up to you. It depends on class, connections, and sheer luck. You pass a baker's shop, already smoky with the smell of bread. Workers heave sacks of grain from Egypt and North Africa, grind it into flour, and spend hours kneading dough. Their arms bulge with muscle, their skin powdered with white dust. Bakers are vital to the city's stomach, but they're also tied to state grain rations. If there's a shortage, the mob riots first at their doors. Historians still argue whether bakers enjoyed decent status or were scorned as laborers, but either way, their day is backbreaking. Further along, you hear the rhythmic clang of metal on metal. Blacksmiths sweating over furnaces hammer swords, nails, and tools into shape. Sparks fly dangerously close to their bare arms. The work pays better than hauling grain, but the risk of burns, blindness, or lung damage is high. Rome doesn't have occupational safety rules. You get hurt, you're out of luck. And then there are the unskilled jobs, the casual day laborers who gather at forums, waiting for someone to hire them for carrying loads, building walls, or digging ditches. You join them briefly, standing in the dusty square while wealthier citizens stroll by choosing bodies like groceries. If you're picked, you haul bricks until your spine feels like it might snap. If you're not picked, you go hungry. Of course, one enormous slice of the workforce isn't free at all: slaves. They clean, build, farm, row ships, and serve cables. Their labor the engine of the empire. You're not a slave, yet. But the line between poor, free citizen and enslaved person is thin. Lose everything, and you might find yourself sold in the market. A chilling thought that makes you clutch your meager purse a little tighter. For women, work looks different. Many spin wool, weave cloth, or run small stalls selling food. Some wealthier women manage estates behind the scenes, while others serve as midwives or wet nurses. And yes, sex work is everywhere, from shabby street corners to lavish brothels. The empire is built on more than stone, it's built on endless human labor. At midday, you take a break, squatting in the shade of a wall, chewing on a piece of bread. Around you, co-workers grumble. One man curses his landlord, another moans about taxes, a third mutters about the soldiers demanding bribes to protect the district. Rome is as much bureaucracy as it is bricks. The system bleeds everyone dry. A quirky tidbit: some Romans actually worked as fullers, laundering clothes in tubs of urine. Yes, urine, collected from public pots on street corners. It was used for bleaching fabric. You wrinkle your nose as you pass one of these workshops, but the fuller laughs, pointing out that his trade is officially taxed by the emperor. Imagine paying the government for the privilege of collecting pee. In contrast, the rich elite don't work in the way you imagine. Senators and equestrians dabble in politics, law, and business, but their true income comes from land, slaves, and shady deals. They stroll the forum in spotless togas, while you rub sore shoulders from carrying amphoras. Life in Rome is brutally unequal, and you're firmly at the bottom. By late afternoon, exhaustion sets in. You've hauled, hammered, or heaved your way through the day. Payment comes in a few bronze coins, barely enough for a loaf of bread, some olives, and rent in your creaking insula. Your hands blister, your clothes stink of sweat and smoke, and your back aches as though you've aged 10 years in one day. Yet the city doesn't stop. Work shifts into evening entertainment, and your fellow laborers drag you along. To the Colosseum, they shout, eyes bright with anticipation. You limp after them, realizing you'll need every scrap of strength to stomach what Rome calls fun. Your body aches from hauling and hammering, but your new friends insist on dragging you along. Tonight, the Colosseum is calling. You shuffle with the crowd, swept up in a tide of excitement. From a distance, the great amphitheater towers above the city, its stone arches glowing in the sunset. Up close, you feel small, insignificant, just another body in the swarm of thousands pressing toward the gates. The air buzzes with anticipation. Vendors hawk bread, nuts, and wine, their baskets weaving through the throng. Beggars cling to the edges, hands outstretched, ignored as the mob pushes forward. The guards at the entrance, hulking men in armor, barely glance at you. Everyone is here: men, women, children, slaves, senators. Rich and poor alike squeeze into the tiers, though of course their seats couldn't be more different. The emperor himself may appear in the imperial box, reclining in comfort, while you wedge yourself onto a hard stone bench. The noise is overwhelming. Tens of thousands of voices echo in the vast bowl of the amphitheater. People chant, cheer, boo, and gossip, waving handkerchiefs or shouting bets on who will live and who will die. A trumpet blares, and suddenly the spectacle begins. First come the beast hunts, venetones. Doors creak open, and cages roll into the arena. Lions, leopards, even elephants are prodded into the sand. Hunters with spears and nets dart around, dodging claws and tusks. The crowd roars approval when a beast falls, blood soaking the sand. You grimace at the brutality, but everyone around you shouts with joy, tossing scraps of food in celebration. You remind yourself, this is their entertainment, their football, their cinema. You probably won't last with your squeamishness showing. Then come the executions. Criminals, prisoners of war, or unlucky slaves are marched into the arena. Some are tied to stakes and mauled by animals. Others are forced to reenact myths. Here's Orpheus, a man dressed as a musician, torn apart by bears. The crowd cackles, children perched on their father's shoulders. You feel your stomach turn. Historians still argue whether every day in the Colosseum was this gruesome, or if some shows leaned more on theater than slaughter, but you've seen enough to know Rome's appetite for blood is real. Finally, the gladiators emerge. Trumpets blast again, and armored men stride into the sand, each with their own weapons: net and trident, sword and shield, curved daggers gleaming. The crowd goes wild, chanting names as though these fighters are rock stars. In a sense, they are. Some gladiators are slaves forced into combat, but others are volunteers chasing fame and prize money. Their images appear on tavern walls and oil lamps. Schoolgirls carve their names into clay as though scribbling Team Marcus in a modern notebook. Two gladiators face off. The clash of steel rings through the arena, each strike met with gasps from the audience. Sweat glistens on their bodies, sand sticks to their skin, and the smell of blood mixes with dust. You hold your breath as one stumbles, collapsing to his knees. He raises a finger, signaling surrender. All eyes turn to the emperor, or whoever presides today. The crowd shouts, some demanding mercy, others calling for death. A thumb turns, a decision is made, and the fallen man's fate is sealed. You swallow hard. It's one thing to hear about gladiators, it's another to watch a life hang on the whim of a restless mob. And here's the strange part. Sometimes the crowd does vote for mercy, clapping joyously when a brave fighter is spared. In other moments, they demand death as though it's the punchline to a joke. Historians still argue whether the thumbs-down gesture we imagine was even real, or if approval and execution looked different in practice. Either way, the result is the same. By the time the games end, you're drained. The crowd stumbles out, buzzing with gossip, replaying their favorite kills, betting on who will win tomorrow. Children mimic gladiator moves with sticks, their parents laughing. You, meanwhile, can't shake the image of blood soaking into sand, erased by the sweep of workers preparing for the next day's show. A quirky tidbit, the Colosseum sometimes flooded for mock naval battles, filling the arena with water so ships could clash. Whether this happened often or only in the early days is debated, but the thought of sitting where you are now and watching boats ramming each other is bizarre enough to make you chuckle briefly. As you shuffle back toward your insula, your ears still ring from the noise and your mind feels heavy. You've worked like a mule, ate like a pauper, and watched death packaged as entertainment. And tomorrow, you'll discover what happens when the law, not the games, decides your fate. Morning in Rome begins not with birdsong, but with the clatter of carts, shouts of vendors, and the ever-present stink of waste. You drag yourself from your straw mattress, body still sore, ears still ringing from yesterday's spectacle. Today, however, you don't need to visit the market or the workshop. Instead, you've been summoned, dragged really, into the world of Roman law and order. It doesn't take much to find trouble in this city. A shove in the wrong alley, a debt unpaid, or even a false accusation can land you before a magistrate. That's where you find yourself now, standing in a crowded forum, sweat beading on your neck as you wait your turn. The courts in Rome aren't hidden away in quiet buildings. Trials often happen in public spaces, watched by curious crowds who treat them as free entertainment. A magistrate sits elevated, flanked by scribes and assistants, while accusers and defendants argue below. There are no lawyers in the modern sense, though wealthy citizens might hire skilled orators to plead their cases. The poor, like you, must rely on luck, eloquence, or the mercy of officials. Your accuser, a neighbor who claims you damaged his amphora while staggering home from the tavern. You protest. You don't even drink that much wine. But your word against his doesn't carry weight. He's a citizen with connections. You're a nobody. The magistrate listens with a bored expression, tapping his wax tablet as he weighs the complaint. Around you, people murmur. Some laugh at your misfortune. Others shake their heads knowingly. This is how Rome works. Justice bends toward the wealthy and influential. Punishments, you realize, can be harsh. A fine is the best outcome, though paying it may ruin you. For more serious crimes, stealing, assault, treason, the consequences escalate. Whipping, branding, exile, or even crucifixion await the unlucky. For slaves, punishment is far worse, as they can be executed for offenses that would earn a free man a slap on the wrist. The law doesn't pretend to treat everyone equally. In your case, the magistrate rules quickly. You'll pay compensation for the amphora, whether you broke it or not. Your heart sinks. Wages vanish as quickly as they're earned, and debts can spiral. Many fall into slavery this way, selling themselves or their children to cover what they owe. Freedom in Rome is never guaranteed. As you shuffle away from the forum, you notice a curious ritual. Men drop wax tablets into an urn, voting on a separate case. The fate of the accused, guilty or innocent, rests in the hands of these citizen jurors. It's democracy, of a kind, but only open to a narrow slice of Rome's population. Women, slaves, and most foreigners are excluded entirely. The city loves to boast of its laws, its order, its justice. But for most people, survival depends not on fairness, but on staying unnoticed. Quirky fact, Romans were obsessed with contracts and written records. From renting a mule to arranging a marriage, nearly everything could be scratched into wax or etched on parchment. Lose your copy, and you might lose your case. So much for trust and handshakes. As the day fades, you trudge back through the streets. You've learned the rules of Roman justice the hard way. The system protects the powerful, punishes the vulnerable, and leaves little room for error. You survive today, but tomorrow, all it might take is another neighbor's accusation, another unlucky glance from a magistrate, and your fragile place in this empire could vanish. And as dusk settles over the city, torches flickering against marble facades, you realize there's more to fear here than the courts. Above the law, beyond it, looms a realm of gods, omens, and rituals that seep into every corner of Roman life. Tomorrow, you'll stumble straight into that world of superstition. You wake the next morning to the smell of incense wafting faintly from a nearby shrine. Rome, you quickly learn, isn't just a city of stone and markets and law, it's a city built on ritual. Everywhere you turn, someone is offering a sacrifice, whispering a prayer, or glancing nervously at the sky to see whether the gods are in a good mood. And spoiler, they rarely are. As you shuffle down the street, you pass a small household altar. A woman pours a few drops of wine onto a tiny fire, murmuring thanks to her family's lairs, guardian spirits meant to watch over the home. Even the poorest households scrape together offerings, because ignoring the spirits is like tempting fate to ruin dinner, crops, or your entire life. You think about your own creaky insula apartment and wonder if you should start bribing invisible house guests too. But religion in Rome isn't private, it's everywhere. A grand temple looms ahead, its marble columns dazzling in the morning light. Inside, priests in spotless robes prepare for sacrifice. An ox lowing unhappily is led forward, its fate sealed. Crowds gather, whispering as the priest checks the animal for blemishes. No perfect animal, no perfect offering. The gods are picky, and the Romans don't risk their wrath. When the ox is slaughtered, the air fills with smoke and sizzling fat. You gag slightly, while those around you lift their hands in reverence. Pieces of the animal's liver are studied closely. Yes, liver reading is a real thing. Historians still argue whether the priests genuinely believed they saw divine signs in the organ's texture or whether it was a bit of ceremonial theater. Either way, the crowd nods gravely, as if the gods have personally texted back. Your stomach growls. The joke, of course, is that ordinary people often got the leftovers after sacrifices. Meat wasn't a daily staple, so the gods' snack time became your rare feast. As you bite into a greasy chunk, you realize even divinity doubles as dinner in Rome. Superstition goes deeper still. Before marching to war or passing a new law, officials consult augurs, men who interpret the flight of birds. If a raven croaks at the wrong moment, an entire campaign can be delayed. Imagine telling your boss you can't work today because a pigeon gave you a funny look. Quirky tidbit, Romans feared crossroads at night, believing they were hangouts for restless spirits. To ward them off, they left offerings of cakes, which means, in a roundabout way, Rome invented both the midnight snack and the ghost deterrent. And it's not just Roman gods demanding attention. As the empire swells, new deities flood in. Isis from Egypt, Mithras from Persia, countless others. Some Romans embrace the exotic cults, others sneer, but everyone agrees you'd better keep the gods happy. You, meanwhile, stumble through rituals with a mix of awe and confusion. Miss a step, say the wrong words, or sneeze at the wrong time, and the ceremony has to start over. No pressure. Imagine trying not to sneeze with incense smoke curling into your nose while the entire neighborhood is staring. As the day winds down, you sit near a temple steps, watching shadows stretch across the forum. You're starting to understand that survival in Rome isn't just about food or law, it's about appeasing forces you can't see. The gods hover over every meal, every contract, every soldier's march. Ignore them, and you risk more than bad luck. You risk the blame of your neighbors when harvests fail or fires spread. You sigh, leaning against cool stone. Tomorrow you'll face something even less forgiving than the gods, the stifling press of life inside your insula. If the gods don't finish you, the housing might. By now, you've discovered that Rome is dazzling on the outside. Temples, theaters, triumphal arches, but your own living situation? Less impressive. Tonight, you return not to a marble villa, but to your cramped insula, a multi-story apartment block wedged between shops and streets. Think less penthouse luxury and more fire hazard stacked on top of a bakery. You squeeze through a narrow doorway into a dark stairwell. The steps creak ominously, worn smooth by countless feet. You climb carefully, because falling here means splintered bones and no doctor willing to treat you cheaply. The higher you climb, the cheaper the rent, but the worse the conditions. And you're practically in the clouds. Inside your tiny unit, the air is stifling. No windows, just a hole in the wall where smoke leaks out. Your bed is a pile of straw that smells vaguely of mildew. You share the room with a neighbor's family, separated only by a thin partition, which means their babies' wails and their arguments become your nightly lullabies. Privacy? Never heard of it. Still, you're lucky compared to some. Entire families cram into singly rooms, cooking over open flames despite the landlord's rules. Fires are so common that whole neighborhoods vanish overnight. Historians still argue whether the government genuinely cared about protecting tenants or whether officials shrugged it off as the price of cheap housing. Either way, you sleep knowing a spark could end you. The smells are relentless. Smoke from cooking fires, sweat from unwashed bodies, and the constant trickle of waste dumped into the street below. The walls are cracked, plaster flaking, and rats scurry freely. You've never seen so many rats in your life. They're practically tenants with better leases. And don't think of plumbing. Insula residents fetch water from fountains outside, lugging heavy buckets up flights of stairs. At night, chamber pots are emptied out the window. You learn quickly not to walk too close to the walls unless you want a surprise shower. But here's the quirky twist. Despite the misery, some insula boasted shops on the ground floor. Bakers, taverns, even tiny workshops operated below. So you could grab bread, a cup of wine, or the latest gossip without leaving the block. Convenience at the cost of constant noise. You can't decide if it's urban genius or torture. As you settle on your straw bed, voices rise around you. One neighbor argues with a landlord over rent. Another sings off-key while hammering at a bit of leather. Someone downstairs is probably still drinking. Sleep doesn't come easily here, and when it does, it's often interrupted by shouts, creaks, or, worst of all, the crash of collapsing wood. Insulas collapse so often they make headlines. Imagine your entire building pancaking because someone added one floor too many. Yet, in the chaos, there's community. Families share food, watch each other's children, and gossip endlessly. People know your name, your debts, and your scandals. You're never truly alone, even when you desperately want to be. As the night wears on, you drift in and out of uneasy rest, clutching your blanket against the chill. Tomorrow will bring a trip to the bathhouse, Rome's attempt to wash off the grime of places like this. Spoiler, it won't help much. But for now, you listen to the creaking timbers above your head and hope they last one more night. Morning sunlight slants through the narrow cracks of your insula, reminding you that your body smells almost as bad as the streets. Rome may be magnificent, but personal hygiene in a crowded city without plumbing? That's where the bathhouse comes in. You grab a worn tunic, a single coin, and shuffle toward the nearest thermae. The bathhouse is impossible to miss, a sprawling complex buzzing with life. People of every stripe gather here: senators, merchants, soldiers, and workers like you. Some bathhouses are small and simple, others, like Caracalla's, are vast palaces of stone, marble, and mosaics. Yours isn't the fanciest, but it still feels like stepping into another world. First, you pay the fee, cheap enough that even the poor scrape it together. You hand over your clothes to an attendant and pray they don't disappear into the black market. Naked as the day you were born, you shuffle forward with the rest of the crowd. It's not private. Everyone bathes together, and body image anxiety wasn't exactly invented yet. You begin in the apoderium, the changing room, where men argue about politics, gladiators, and yesterday's chariot race. Then you enter the tepidarium, a warm chamber that eases you into the heat. Steam clings to your skin, and your muscles sigh with relief. Next stop, the caldarium, a sweltering room heated by furnaces below the floor. Hot air seeps through gaps in the tiles, an ancient version of underfloor heating. You sweat rivers, pores screaming as grime loosens. Then comes the scrubbing. Attendants scrape your skin with a curved tool called a strigil, dragging off sweat, dirt, and oil. It's both disgusting and satisfying. Imagine peeling a sticker off a dirty window. That's you, now slightly shinier. Finally, you plunge into the frigidarium, the cold bath. The shock jolts you awake. You gasp, but soon your heart steadies, and for a brief moment, you actually feel clean. But bathing is only half the story. The thermae are also social clubs. Vendors stroll through, hawking snacks and perfumes. Philosophers argue loudly in corners. Some men gamble with dice, others flirt shamelessly. There's even a library in some complexes. Who knew you could read scrolls half naked? Quirky tidbit: Romans often used olive oil as soap, rubbing it on and then scraping it off with dirt. Yes, oil plus dirt equals clean. You're not convinced. Historians still argue whether the baths spread disease or helped prevent it. With so many sweaty bodies packed together, the water wasn't exactly pristine. Still, people swore by the ritual, and skipping a bath marked you as uncivilized. After hours, you stumble back into the street, skin tingling, stomach growling. You're relaxed, yes, but you also know this routine isn't sustainable. You spend money, risk theft, and waste precious time. And tomorrow, you'll stink again. As you trudge home, you catch the sound of cheering. A crowd rushes past, heading toward the Circus Maximus. Chariots are racing today, and your neighbors insist you come. Your legs ache, but you know there's no way out. After all, the only thing more dangerous than Rome's streets is skipping Rome's favorite pastime. By the time you near the Circus Maximus, the noise is already deafening. Imagine a football stadium crammed with over 150,000 people, all screaming, betting, and waving team colors. That's the scale of Rome's greatest obsession, chariot racing. Forget gladiators. This is the true addiction of the masses. The stadium is a sea of banners, blues, greens, reds, and whites, the four great racing factions. Supporters paint their faces, wear dyed tunics, and shout insults at rival fans. You're dragged into the green section, whether you like it or not. Your new friends shove a cup of watered wine in your hand and warn you not to cheer for anyone else unless you enjoy being trampled. The race begins with a trumpet blast. Gates spring open and teams of horses thunder onto the track, wheels rattling, dust exploding into the air. The charioteers, barely more than slaves themselves, lean forward with terrifying skill, steering with reins wrapped around their waists. One wrong move, and they're dragged to death. You wince, realizing these men live on the edge of disaster for the chance at glory. The crowd goes feral. People scream prayers to their gods, hurl curses at rival teams, and clutch betting slips. You watch as one chariot clips another, wheels locking for a breathless instant before splintering apart. The driver is flung violently, bouncing along the ground. The audience erupts, not in horror, but in delight. To them, danger is half the fun. Your ears ring, your throat burns from shouting dust, and your stomach knots. You're not even sure which team is winning anymore, but your section roars in triumph as the greens cross the finish line. Coins change hands rapidly. A few unlucky bettors tear their hair and curse Jupiter himself. Quirky tidbit. Some Roman fans were so loyal to their faction that riots occasionally erupted. Entire neighborhoods burned during clashes between greens and blues. Historians still argue whether these teams were simply sporting groups or proto-political movements with real power. Either way, the emperors kept a close eye on the races, knowing the wrong team's loss could spark unrest. As the crowd spills out, you're nearly crushed in the press of bodies. Vendors shove roasted nuts, honey cakes, and cheap wine at you. Children dart through the mob trying to snatch purses. You clutch yours tightly, muttering that you're lucky to leave with both sandals still on your feet. By nightfall, the roar of the circus still echoes in your ears. You slump against a wall, exhausted. The city never runs out of entertainment, but every show drains your body, your wallet, and your nerves. You barely have time to recover before another reality of Roman life creeps in: the lack of safety after dark. Lanterns flicker weakly, alleys grow dangerous, and shadows stretch long. If the races didn't kill you, the streets might. Tomorrow, you'll discover just how hazardous Rome becomes when the sun goes down. Night in Rome is not the peaceful hush you might imagine. As the sun sinks behind the hills, the city doesn't quiet, it transforms. Shadows lengthen, lamps flicker in doorways, and the streets fill with a different kind of energy, one of danger, secrets, and survival. You step out cautiously, clutching your thin cloak tighter. The first thing you notice is how dark it is. Rome has no streetlights, just scattered oil lamps or torches hung outside taverns and shrines. Beyond those dim pools of light lies almost total blackness. Your feet stumble over uneven cobblestones, and you pray you won't twist an ankle in the gloom. The sounds shift too. By day, it's market cries and hammering. By night, it's laughter spilling from taverns, whispered deals in alleyways, and sudden shouts followed by silence. You catch sight of drunken revelers staggering from a wine shop, singing loudly and off-key. You edge around them because drunks here are unpredictable. Rome at night belongs to thieves. Cut purses slip silently through crowds, blades ready to slice coin purses from belts. You keep a hand on your pouch, remembering stories of men stripped bare in dark alleys. The Law Watch exists, but their presence is spotty and often corrupt. Sometimes they'll protect you, sometimes they're the ones demanding bribes. You pass a group of prostitutes under a portico, their laughter masking watchful eyes. Some call out to you, while others mutter warnings about rougher gangs deeper in the streets. You nod politely and keep walking, heart hammering. Rome tolerates their trade, but the night exposes how vulnerable everyone becomes. Suddenly, a scuffle erupts nearby, two men grappling, curses flying. One draws a dagger, the metal glinting in firelight. You retreat quickly, pressing yourself against a wall until the clash fades into the labyrinth of alleys. Violence is common, and the law rarely cares what happens once darkness falls. Quirky tidbit. Wealthy Romans often hired slaves to walk ahead of them with lanterns, not for safety, but to show off status. Some even employed bodyguards called lictors to clear their path. You, on the other hand, have only your wits and a prayer. Historians still argue whether the city authorities deliberately allowed night chaos as a pressure valve for the poor, or whether they were simply powerless to control it. Either way, after sundown, you're on your own. By the time you reach your insula, your nerves are shredded. You scramble up the creaking stairs, shut the flimsy wooden door, and collapse on your straw bed. Sleep comes uneasily, punctuated by distant howls of dogs, the clatter of pottery thrown during drunken fights, and the occasional eerie silence that makes you sit up, listening. You realize something sobering. In Rome, you're never safe. Day brings crushing labor, heat, and crowds. Night brings thieves, fire, and fear. The empire may look glorious by torchlight, but to live here is to survive each hour as it comes. And soon, you'll confront a reality that overshadows even the dangers of night. What happens when your fragile health falters in a world where medicine is more superstition than science? You wake one morning with a pounding head, a burning throat, and an ache deep in your bones. Congratulations! You've joined the millions of Romans who discover that illness here is less "take a sick day" and more "this might be the end." In a city crammed with people, disease spreads faster than gossip. Water from aqueducts is clean enough at the source, but once stored in open cisterns and carried in filthy buckets, it becomes a breeding ground for trouble. Food spoils quickly in the heat, waste piles in alleys. You've probably inhaled more bacteria than breadcrumbs since arriving. You stumble outside hoping for relief, but instead you're greeted with remedies that sound more like punishment. A neighbor suggests a mixture of wine and crushed herbs. Another swears by tying an amulet of dog's teeth around your neck. The local medicus, a doctor of sorts, offers to balance your humors by bleeding you with a knife. You're not sure whether to thank him or run. Roman medicine leans heavily on the theory of 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much of one, and you're doomed. The cure? Purging, vomiting, bloodletting, or cooling diets. You wonder if anyone actually gets better or if the treatment just finishes what the disease started. Still, not everything is nonsense. Surgeons have scalpels, forceps, and bone saws, and battlefield doctors patch up soldiers with surprising skill. But in your case, a fever that makes your head spin, the options are limited. You curl up in your straw bed, clutching a cup of watered wine, and hope your body fights it off. Quirky tidbit. Romans believed cabbage could cure almost anything: hangovers, wounds, even bad breath. You try nibbling a leaf and decide it's more likely to kill your appetite than your illness. Historians still argue whether the empire's advanced public health systems, like aqueducts and sewers, helped more than they harmed. Some say they reduced disease. Others claim they spread it by connecting neighborhoods with shared water supplies. Either way, your cough doesn't care. After days of misery, you manage to stumble to a bathhouse where attendants rub oil on your feverish skin and scrape it off with a strigil. For a moment, you almost feel human again. Then, a sneeze sends half the chamber glaring at you. No one wants to share your plague. Eventually, your fever breaks, whether thanks to cabbage, wine, or dumb luck, you'll never know. You survive, but you're thinner, weaker, and poorer from days without work. And survival here means immediately being shoved back into the grind. Rome doesn't wait for you to recover, it expects you to keep up or collapse. As you drag yourself into daylight again, you notice something darker lingering in your thoughts. If sickness nearly destroyed you, what happens when hunger, taxes, or riots join in? You're about to find out. Just when you think you've earned a moment to breathe, Rome reminds you that survival isn't just about food, baths, or dodging thieves. It's about money. And in this empire, money flows upward, always. It starts with rent. Your landlord appears at your insolent door, palm outstretched, reminding you that your straw-filled room in a crumbling fire trap isn't free. Miss a payment, and he'll toss you into the street without hesitation. There are no tenant protections, no appeals. You pay or you vanish. Then come the taxes. Officials prowl the forum, quills scratching across wax tablets as they tally what you owe. Grain tax, land tax, head tax. It doesn't matter if you're already broke, Rome's bureaucracy is relentless. You mutter that it feels like the government's main export is paperwork. Your neighbor snorts paperwork and misery. Worse, corruption seeps into everything. Soldiers stationed nearby demand bribes for protection. Inspectors ask for gifts to look the other way. You realize quickly that honesty doesn't pay here. Grease the right palms and you survive. Refuse and you're crushed. Meanwhile, inflation is creeping in. The coins in your pouch are thinner than they used to be, the silver content shaved down by emperors desperate to stretch the treasury. Merchants demand more coins for the same loaf of bread. You grumble, but what choice do you have? Quirky tidbit: some Romans buried jars of coins in their floors or courtyards to hide them from tax collectors. Archaeologists still dig them up today, ancient piggy banks left behind by people who likely didn't live long enough to reclaim them. Historians still argue whether taxation held the empire together or slowly tore it apart. On one hand, taxes funded roads, aqueducts, and armies. On the other, crushing levies drained the poor until they snapped. Standing in line to hand over your meager coins, you feel firmly in the tore it apart camp. By the time you finish paying, your purse is nearly empty. You trudge through the market, stomach rumbling, knowing you can't afford much more than a crust of bread and a few olives. Meanwhile, senators in gleaming togas recline in villas, sipping imported wine sweetened with honey. The gulf between you and them is wider than the empire itself. As dusk falls, you sit against a wall, counting your last few coins. Survival feels like a joke. Every day you scrape, pay, and pray, only to be shoved back to the starting line. And looming behind it all is the unspoken truth. Rome doesn't just take your money, it takes your loyalty. Refuse to play the empire's game, and you'll find yourself crushed beneath it. And tomorrow, you'll see just how fragile this empire of marble and dust really is, because riots, fires, and chaos are always just one spark away. The air feels heavier tonight. You wander through Rome's streets, and there's an uneasy hum beneath the surface. A rumor spreads like wildfire. The price of bread is rising again, and the people aren't happy. Crowds gather near the Circus Maximus, voices rising, fists shaking. You can sense it before it happens. The city is about to boil over. Riots in Rome aren't polite affairs. They erupt like storms, sudden and unstoppable. A spark, maybe a corrupt grain official caught hoarding supplies, maybe just an unlucky cart tipping over in the forum, ignites the fury of thousands. Stones fly, vendors overturn stalls, mobs surge through alleyways. You're caught in the crush of bodies, shoved and trampled, the smell of sweat, fear, and dust clogging your lungs. Soldiers march in, shields locked, clubs raised. They don't ask questions. They swing, shove, and batter their way through the masses. You duck into a doorway, heart pounding, as screams echo. Somewhere nearby, a torch lights up, then another. Within moments, the night sky glows orange. Fire is the real monster of Rome. The city is built of wood stacked upon wood, insulae leaning precariously, beams dry as tinder. Flames leap from rooftop to rooftop, faster than you can run. Panic takes over as people hurl buckets of water, but it's like spitting on a dragon. You cough, eyes stinging, as smoke pours through the narrow streets. Families clutch possessions, statues topple, walls collapse. Quirky tidbit. Some Romans believed that fire was a tool of the gods, cleansing corruption. Others whispered darker tales, that emperors themselves sometimes looked the other way, or even encouraged flames to clear land for new palaces. Historians still argue whether Nero truly fiddled while Rome burned, or if that was just slander passed down by enemies. Tonight, as you stumble through choking smoke, history feels less like debate and more like raw terror. The fire has no care for politics. It devours rich and poor alike, senators and slaves, leaving only ash. You manage to escape with your life, but the city you wake to in the morning is scarred. Charred beams jut like broken teeth, temples stand blackened, and the smell of burnt grain and bodies lingers. You realize now you wouldn't last a day in the Roman Empire, not truly. Between disease, hunger, taxes, riots, and fire, the empire isn't marble perfection, but a constant struggle for breath, coin, and survival. The postcards of grandeur leave out the coughs, the blisters, the empty stomachs. And yet, somehow, millions of ordinary Romans endured it, day after grinding day. As you sit on the edge of a ruined street, soot on your hands, lungs aching, you look at the rising sun painting the smoke golden. Rome survives again, scarred but stubborn. And for all its cruelty, it's also strangely beautiful. An empire forever caught between glory and collapse. The streets of Rome fade now. The smoke drifts away. The shouting quiets, and the heat of the flames softens into a memory. The cobblestones you walked upon smooth themselves into silence, and the weight of survival begins to lift. You've carried enough for one night. Take a slow breath, feeling your chest rise and fall. Imagine yourself stepping out of the chaos, away from the crowds, away from the empire itself. The buildings around you dissolve into gentle shadows, the sounds of clashing voices replaced by the steady hush of your own calm breathing. What remains is peace. No fire, no hunger, no endless demands for coin. Just the stillness of this moment. the kind of stillness Romans themselves might have longed for, lying awake in their cramped rooms, wishing for quiet. Another breath, deeper now, like drawing in cool air after a long storm. Let your shoulders ease. Let your thoughts loosen. You don't need to fight for survival here. You don't need to pay taxes or dodge riots or wonder where your next meal is coming from. Here you are safe, and everything heavy can be set down. Feel yourself lying back as if on soft grass, the stars above unchanging. The empire, for all its noise, becomes small beneath the endless sky. You are larger than the dust of Rome, and gentler and freer. So let the last images fade. Let the city of stone crumble into dreams, where it cannot touch you anymore. You've walked far enough tonight. Rest now. Sleep comes easily. Thank you for spending this quiet time with Drow's History. If you enjoy calm stories that help you both relax and discover history, you are warmly welcome to subscribe and gently like. It truly helps this channel grow.